Hello and welcome to week 8. This week we're going to continue to talk about composite restorations. We'll first start to discuss contours. Contours are convexities on both the distal and mesial surfaces of our teeth. Each tooth has a proximal height of contour, which is the area with maximum convexity that is on the proximal surface. As you can see in the picture here, there's a buccal height of contour, a little bit lower on this molar. There's also a lingual height of contour, which is a little bit higher. This does vary per tooth. The proximal height of contour is responsible for the creation of the proximal contact. So when we floss and you get that snap, that is that proximal height of contour creating that tension. It also creates the embrasure, that triangle area between teeth. An ideal contour between two adjacent teeth is necessary to maintain tooth position and dentition stability. It's going to keep the teeth from moving and shifting. Also prevents food from getting stuck in between teeth and facilitates hygienic cleaning. A poor or defective proximal contour will cause food impaction, which can lead to decay. It'll be harder to clean in between your teeth, and that could lead to periodontal issues and also recurrent decay. Interproximal contacts include a contact area, which again is the point of area where the teeth are touching each other at that proximal height of contour. For anterior teeth, this contact point is in the incisal 1/3, and for posterior teeth, the contact area is about 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters at the junction of the incisal and middle third of the tooth. Again, contact areas serve a few purposes. One is to keep food from getting packed in between the teeth. It also helps to stabilize the arches so they're not shifting and moving. If there is no contact at all, food can easily become impacted in the area, which can cause periodontal disease, plaque buildup, and ultimately recurrent decay. If the contact is too tight though, or even too broad or rough, the patient is going to have trouble flossing there, they're going to give up flossing, and that's going to lead to big problems as well. So as you can see here, these outlines of the maxillary teeth from the incisal and occlusal aspects show the intersecting lines of the contact areas. So as you can see, where the teeth touch, it's a little bit different for anteriors, posteriors, even like molars to premolars. The mouth is an arch, so they're not going to line up the exact same way to each other. So you can see the molars in the back are fairly straight on, but as you start to get to the front, it starts to curve a little bit more. Interproximal contact characteristics. So interproximal contacts typically have the following characteristics. 1, contact tends to be centered buccolingually below the marginal ridges. Contacts tend to be highly convex in the middle and occlusal thirds. Contact surface tends to be flat or concave in the cervical third. And if there is gingival recession, there is a tendency for the cervical third to assume a concave form. So to help achieve these characteristics, it's important to select the correct matrix system that reflects these characteristics built into the design of them. Sectional matrices tend to result in tighter contacts, especially for posterior composite restorations, because they're already pre-contoured, they're doing that contouring work for us. Next, we'll talk about the placement of Class 2 composite restorations. So typical matrices for posterior composite restorations can include the Toffelmeier. It's not my favorite. I usually recommend a Toffelmeier for amalgam restorations only. I just don't like the way the contours turn out and the floss. It's not great. So I much prefer to use sectional matrices, but if you are a Toffelmeier lover, feel free to use a Toffelmeier as well. Toffelmeiers are beneficial if there is not an adjacent tooth. That may be the only time that I might use one, but there also are automatrixes. So I'd probably lean towards an automatrix instead of a Toffelmeier if there's not a tooth behind or in front of the tooth that we're working on. We've talked about the Toffelmeier before, but just to recap, the U-shaped head has 3 guides for the position of the band, left, right, or straight. The inner knob adjusts the diameter of the loop, while the outer knob locks the band into the rotating spindle. And And again, just some disadvantages. It can create point contacts or even no contacts and very straight non-anatomical walls where we want those walls kind of convexed out. It also is very difficult to use on badly broken teeth. There's a video in the resources and materials folder. Feel free to look at it again. It's just going over the Toffenmayer matrix, which we've already covered before. Next we have the auto matrix, which is a ring that goes around the entire tooth, and then there is a special instrument used that helps to tighten it. It doesn't require any separate retaining rings to hold it in place, but it just solely relies on that act of cinching it tight together around the circumference of the tooth. This is what I prefer to use instead of Toffenmayer's if there's not an adjacent tooth. If there is adjacent teeth to the restoration I'm placing, I'm always going to use the sectional matrix. But if there's not a tooth in front of behind the tooth that we're working on, auto matrix is the direction that I go. They're easy to place, can be used in most any size restoration as long as a gingival purchase can be secured. So you need a little bit of tooth above the gingiva. A tightening device and snipping device are part of the system. You tighten with the tightening device. When you're finished and ready to take the band off, you just snip the high metal portion off, and then the whole band comes off. Some disadvantages: it isn't pre-contoured and is also more likely to produce a high narrow contact point along with a flat proximal surface. You can burnish before you use it, and it makes things a little bit better. But again, I only use this for situations where there's not an adjacent tooth, so I'm not really worried about contact anyways, but I'm still going to burnish out the sides of the wall so that the proximal surfaces are not as flat and really just flat and straight. I want them to be a little bit concave. And again, there is a video in the materials and resources folder outlining how an auto matrix works. Next, we have the sectional, which is my pride and joy. It is my favorite. It is a metal band, wedge, and ring clamp placed around the tooth. Advantages include that the bands are pre-contoured and they're burnishable, which allows production of an ideal proximal surface. It also produces very tight contacts, which is what we want. Disadvantages include that they are often not suitable for large direct restorations that include oversized portions of the labial or lingual walls. And they can often become deformed a little bit easily, especially if contacts are not fully broken prior to placement. So it's important for the dentist to fully break the contacts before we insert these bands, or else trying to get them in between the two teeth can be a pain. Again, there is a video. Please check it out just to see how a sectional matrix works. Another video. Please check it out. Steps for placing a Class 2 composite. So first we're going to place the matrix and wedge. Typically a sectional matrix is used if there's an adjacent tooth. If there's not an adjacent tooth, then you can use a Toffenmayer or an auto matrix. Make sure you're burnishing against your contact before you're placing the filling. That way your contact is going to be a little bit concave and you're going to have that nice tight snap when you're flossing. We're going to then etch for 15 to 30 seconds depending on what method you are using. And then step 3, prime, bond, and cure. If you're using a universal etch, prime, and bond system, you can merge steps 2 and 3 together. For step 4, we're going to add a small amount of flowable composite to the box of the cavity prep and then cure. Some people like to do that. I am one of those people that do. I don't even fill up the whole box. I really just line where the tooth meets the matrix band. That way I can ensure a good seal. Other people will kind of fill up that whole box. Some people will not use any flowable at all. Ultimately, it is up to the dentist that you work for and maybe what they prefer. But my personal preference is to fill that box just slightly, enough that while I'm compacting the composite, none is going to push out through that band. So then you cure that, and then step 5, add packable composite against the wall of the matrix band. We really want to focus on building up that wall and turning this filling into a Class 1 composite ultimately. So we're going to fill up that wall, make sure you're compacting against the band, and then cure that. Continue adding composites into 2 mm increments to fill all of the anatomy up. And then last steps, check contours to ensure that the restoration is not under contoured. If it is, you can add more material at this time. That's really it until we start finishing and polishing next week. These are the basic steps for our class 2. So be sure to watch this video on class 2 placement in the materials and resources folder. Some class 2 considerations. So back-to-back class 2 restorations. When placing them back to back, I usually prefer to use a sectional matrix to place one of the restorations, and then I will remove the matrix and polish the interproximal so that I have nice smooth surfaces, and then I will put the sectional matrix set up on the second tooth and place that restoration like normal. I've seen people put even like 2 bands back to back. I don't love how secure it is, and I don't love the contacts that creates. So I prefer to do them one at a time while polishing the first tooth in between till when I place the second tooth. Inadequate contacts. This obviously is a big issue. The dentist will need to completely re-prep that contact area. They don't necessarily need to re-prep the whole filling, including the occlusal surfaces, but they typically have to at least prep out the interproximal box so that you can ensure a good contact. Getting that good contact is usually much easier that second time around then, since the doctor usually removes a smaller portion of the contact area versus you having to do the whole filling over again. If there's overhangs, make sure that you are preventing overhangs by choosing the correct band size and the correct wedge size, so that way when you pack the composite into the box, it is not squeezing out through the matrix. This will help you prevent overhangs. And then lastly, pre-wedging. If you're having trouble getting the matrix band around the tooth, it sometimes is helpful to pre-wedge. That way when you place the band, there's more room since the wedge is already creating that space for you. Once you get the band in, you can remove the pre-wedge and then place it back in to ensure that the band is properly wedged.